Welcome in, folks, for another episode of What's Bruin, brought to you by Dom.Hockey. I am your host, Chris Nozick, joined by Gayle Trioni, as always. Gayle, we got some great news, I think. Some people, great is quantifiable, we'll say. We got some news from the Boston Bruins today, which has led to a special lunch hour edition of us doing the show live.
I think I'm going to start walking downstairs, so give me a moment as I slowly walk.
Not a problem. I know you have the alarm thing going off in the little AC unit that you have there. So, but yeah, Boston Bruins general manager Don Sweeney gets a 2-year contract extension. Bruins sign a prospect in goal, and conference finals are starting tonight. So we've got more than you would think we would have to talk about on a special lunch hour.
Oh, absolutely.
So, but how have things been since our last live, which I promise I'm getting that episode out when you have 3 hours to go through and make sure you cut it at the right spot. And yeah, I'm going to do 2 parts, and I'll release the full episode in one so people can listen how they choose. So, but how you been since our last chat?
Pretty good. I was actually out at Fenway the other night. Got the Devers walk off, so that was pretty cool.
Awesome. And I promise we won't go for 3 hours because I do want to catch my daughter's softball game this afternoon since I'm able to get there.
And I have to work.
And you have your shift. So
I dropped my daughter off for DC this morning. Their 8th grade trip is headed. So she is, let's see, where is she right now?
Depending on what I know, when I had to leave for mine, we got dropped off at like 5 a.m.
She's in Cranberry. She's at Chick-fil-A in Cranberry, New Jersey right now. They stopped for lunch. So she's 5 hours and 32 minutes away right now. So she is ecstatic to be gone. Well, not to be gone, but she's so excited for this trip.
I remember it was fun. It's always a good time. So, and between my daughter going and kids that I know, people I went to school with, their kids going, and it's fun. So,
unfortunately, Andrew, our son was he was COVID. His 8th grade was COVID, so they missed it. My
sister was 2001, 8th grade year. So she was just after 9/11. They ended up going to Toronto instead. So they were the odd group out. But we already got Andrew jumping in. Figured the Sweeney signing was coming. Couldn't imagine Neely or the Jacobs allowing him to tear things down at the deadline if he wasn't being signed. All right. So Andrew, thanks for keeping us on track because we will go off for hours as we have before. So Don Sweeney, he gets the contract extension for 2 years. But as we talked about before we jumped on here, he was still under contract for the 25-26 season. So this goes 2 years beyond that. What are your thoughts? I did not hate the extension as much as some people did.
Well, I think everyone just wanted him fired in the fan base.
Yes, fan base.
Or I shouldn't say everyone. Majority of the fan base wanted Sweeney gone. I think if you look at what he's done, his first year, and I don't even count 2015, 2016, because that was his first year on the job. He inherited a lot that year, and they didn't make the playoffs that year. And that was his first year of his contract and entering his last year of his contract are the only 2 times the Boston Bruins did not make the playoffs. Think about that. Okay. Number 1. Number 2, the draft. We still don't know, because we talk about this ad nauseum. We still don't know what players are going to hit that are in the prospects because of the fact, 1, he's traded players away to bring in other pieces. Right. 2, who were those players pushing out through those years? When you still have Bergeron, Krejci, you still had Tyler Seguin through parts of it. You still had Milan Lucic through parts of it. You had, your core was intact. You had Chara, you had Krejci, you had Bergeron, you had Marchand, and then in comes Pastrnak. You know what I mean? So who were those prospects pushing out? So I still think that Sweeney gets a bad rap for stuff when the team, yes, there's only one championship. He wasn't the GM. He was in the organization, but he wasn't the GM. In 2013, it was still Peter Chiarelli. It was not Don Sweeney. They went to the finals in 2019 with Don Sweeney as the GM, and they had the historic season as the GM. Again, yes, people like to talk about the three coaches. Claude Julien had 2 seasons back to back. It was Don Sweeney entering, and anyone that knows when you have a new boss that comes in, they shake things up. They shake things up. It happens. So missing the playoffs 2 years in a row, they move on from Chiarelli. Sweeney's in place a lot. I wasn't happy when they fired Claude Julien. I love Claude Julien, but it was time to move on from him. They brought in Bruce
It was the
Cassidy.
start of a reset.
Right. They brought in Bruce Cassidy, and they went to the Stanley Cup Finals. His first year as a coach, something did not click within the organization with Bruce Cassidy. Again, we can speculate that it was the players. We can speculate this. We can speculate that. We have no idea, because no one, unless they tell a book, unless someone releases a book, you're never going to know the real reason why Bruce Cassidy was fired.
But here's my counter to that too. Okay, let's go down a little bit of the rabbit hole. Let's say the players went in and said, we don't like X, Y, and Z about the way the coach is handling stuff. Well, the coach's contract was a lot easier to terminate than all the players. Because if you have to pick between players and the coach, in that situation, it was a lot easier to change the head coach and go, okay, players, what are you looking for in a coach? Let's find someone who fits what you're looking for and what we want to accomplish. And that's what they were hoping for in Jim Montgomery. Now, yes, does it suck to watch Bruce Cassidy go to Vegas and win a cup right away? Absolutely. But it's also one of those things where, we've seen Don Sweeney be so diplomatic before. You really don't think he said in the conversation, hey, this is what we've been getting information about? And then Bruce Cassidy can grow as a person and then take that to his next stop and be a better coach. If he stays in Boston to this day, he's not the same coach that he is right now with Vegas because of the termination.
The other thing is, again, you have to look at the players that were on the Boston roster when Bruce Cassidy was let go. You have to look. It was Bergeron, it was Krejci, it was Marchand. You know what I mean? So we have to look at the players. It wasn't like it was a bunch of young prospects that were just coming up. These were seasoned veterans that something was not working.
And and it's not like they asked one player and said, what do you think? It wasn't like Jake DeBrusk is the face of it for some reason, but Bruce Cassidy was not the reason that Jake DeBrusk ever asked for a trade. That was purely, honestly, I think that was purely the fans' fault, because he kept being the face of all things negative Bruins, and he was the face of the 2015 draft that didn't go the way that Boston was hoping for. Do you remember back in 22, when everybody was clamoring for a winger for Krejci, or in 2018, or no, it was 2018 for the winger, and then 2022 when everyone was clamoring for the left shot defenseman that we needed? Well, he went out and got those players. We got the winger for Krejci. We got Rick Nash. To do that, we had to give up the left shot defenseman we had in our system in Ryan Lindgren. So now not only did he have a guy for him, but he had to replace that guy. And this is a cycle that we can see. We can see the cycle happening right now before our very eyes, and people just don't want to look at it. They really don't.
Thing is, people want to believe, and again, this isn't the entire fan base, but this is a majority of the fan base. People want to believe that they're smarter than Don, but they're not taking into consideration what the players expect in return. So yes, they can go out and they can make an offer, but if another team beats them in that offer, whether it be AAV, whether it be length, we don't know the inner workings because again, Sweeney is never one to put a player on the spot to say we offered this. And in order to get things, you have to give things up. You know what
That's
I
called
mean?
negotiation.
Right. And then the whole salary cap back in 2015, 2016, 2019, even 2022, 23, the cap was at a certain spot that he was still eating contracts from Chiarelli too. It's not like he put the team in the spot by himself. You know what I mean?
Right.
And because certain players took team friendly deals to stay within the organization. Not every player is going to be Patrice Bergeron and be like,
Right.
I care more about winning than I do about money because I have enough money. You know, my family's taken care of type of thing. You know what I mean? Not every player has that mindset.
Right. And I know everybody wants to complain about everybody's knock. I hear it all the time. Don Sweeney can make trades. His free agent signings have been questionable. Some of them have worked, some of them haven't. But I mean, I think we can all sit here and say Elias Lindholm did not start last season healthy. Period. End of story. And that had a massive
Oh,
effect on him. I mean, look at how he's doing in Worlds right now. Like,
mhm.
people I think are going to be really shocked at what we see from Elias Lindholm this coming season, assuming his health stays in place. Like, I don't think that can go underestimated.
Because playing in Worlds.
Yeah, exactly. So
Look how he's playing in Worlds.
I know people are sitting there going, "Oh, you had to have a Patrice Bergeron replacement drafted and developed and so on and so forth." Well, if you look at the drafting pattern, he has drafted at least one center for multiple years. So they haven't
Mhm.
exactly ignored their need for center. Like even in 2020, they had 4 draft picks. They spent half of them on centers and half of them on defensemen. So like you don't know when Bergeron is actually going to say I'm done. Like you have to go to him year in and year out and say how are we feeling? What do we think? Once he reaches a certain point. And that's where they got to with Brad Marchand this year and they said we can't let Brad Marchand leave the organization for nothing. We don't want to keep him past this season. We lost Zdeno Chara for nothing and he went on to have a few more good seasons. They weren't what we needed from the player, and we can't overpay for that. So we've all but got
Right.
the first round draft pick now. He just has to step on the ice now for the first game of the conference final. And barring him stepping off a curb and snapping an ankle, we should be good on that. But
Right. Don't jinx it.
I don't want to, but it still could happen. And it's looking like it's going to be a 2027 first. Okay. I'm fine with that. They didn't have a 26 to give us, so it's not like they could give us a 25, 26 pick. You got the first one available in the line. Like, and the only
Right.
way you were going to get it is if you were okay with it being slid to 2028 because they might not have had the 2027. So, like,
Right.
eh, was it the best move? No, but
It's still gonna be a first. It's still gonna be a first round. It's a matter of what year.
right. But it's also like, could you have gotten
So
more from someone else? Yeah, maybe. But by working with the player in that situation, the player is happier. And guess what? When players talk to Brad Marchand about Boston, he's not going to sit there and say, yeah, you don't want to go there.
well, and let's be realistic. Say they sent Brad Marchand to Utah. Would the fan base have been happy
No.
that they sent him to a team that wasn't a contender?
The fan base would not have been happy unless they sent him to maybe one team. And it was their
Right.
other favorite team.
Hold,
So for some
please.
people, it'd be, whoop. Did I
Hold,
get you?
please. Nope. Hold on. Hold on.
Uh-oh. Am I on a delay? Did I lose your connection? Uh-oh. I think we lost you, Gayle. Come on. Let's see if we can get her back here. Yep, we lost her. So we will get her back in on probably an internet failure here in just a minute. But yeah, let's see. Andrew, you said I want Neely gone, not Sweeney. I get that sentiment. I'm coming around a little bit more on Neely. I've had enough additional conversation with people, and honestly, some conversation with Gayle. And when she gets back on, I'll talk to her about it as well. That the two do work well together. It is kind of a counterbalance between the two. And so some of, sounds like we just got her back in. So let's get her pulled back up here just a second. But they counteract each other. They kind of rein each other in a little bit, and in tandem with each other, they make the ultimately the best move. There we go. We got you back. Oh, I think we're losing out on audio. There we go. Now you're back.
Yeah. Yeah, my Wi-Fi today is not a happy place.
Yeah, we've all been there. So benefits of doing the live show. I don't remember what I was saying when you left, but pull up Andrew's comment. He says, "I want Neely gone, not Sweeney." Which me, I have said that repeatedly. I'm actually starting to back off on it a little bit.
Okay.
Some of the conversation that we've had, and as Bruins Meat says, that they're intertwined. You got to drop both or keep them both. I do think Cam Neely has a little bit more deeper roots within the organization. I think his leash is a little longer with ownership, but they are they're like a yin and yang situation, And so I can't imagine being in meetings with them. I'm sure they go at it all the time with each other. But then when the meeting breaks, they're just kind of like, oh, okay, like we're still friends, that kind of thing. But healthy debate kind of thing.
Well, I really think that Cam Neely is still as competitive in the front office as he was on the ice. Okay.
Yeah.
He still has the passion. When people say all he cares about is money, that's not true, because you can say that about the Jacobs if you want. Whether or not that's true or not is whatever. But it's not Neely, it's not Sweeney, because I'm sure they get a bonus for different things, just like players do. Like it's in their contract that they'll get a bonus if they make the playoffs, or if they make this round, or there's conditions to every contract.
The organization's also more profitable when they're winning.
Right.
So I know the narrative of they just want a home round series. No, they want 4 home round series.
Right. 100%. But I think that what gets lost is, again, sometimes, and I don't know this for sure, it's just from being around, that sometimes Neely is too much like a helicopter mom.
I can see that. Yep.
You know what I mean? Where he's in Sweeney's ear saying, I like this player, go get this player. You know what I mean? I think that Sweeney, the reason why we saw Sweeney scouting more after the trade deadline and right before the trade deadline is because he knew at the trade deadline that he was going to have to implode part of the roster. And he wants to fall on the sword himself. He doesn't want someone else blamed. Like he wants to take ownership, and he wants to be able to say that I saw this player and I see what's in this player. And because let's not forget, no one was happy when he signed Morgan Geekie.
No, they weren't. They were like, "Who the hell is this?"
Right.
And the contract, people, we're signing him for way too much money. He's not going to be enough. He's a third liner. It's way too much. Blah blah blah. And now you're sitting here going, "Oh shit, we got to keep this guy. He's a
Right.
30 goal scorer." Like,
And again, it's a change of scenery, and someone said that on Twitter last night or the night before, whatever night it was that Florida eliminated Toronto, about Mitch Marner, that maybe he just needs a change of scenery. It happens. It happens that players get, like, let's look at Zaka. We talked about him when we were talking about grades and stuff like that. When he got away from Pasternak, he was playing more free. As much as the chemistry he built with Pasternak, sometimes when you're overshadowed by that superstar, you don't perform as well because you're looking for that superstar to pass the puck to. You know what I mean? And so maybe that's what Marner needs. Maybe he needs to be away from Nylander and Matthews and Tavares. Maybe he needs to be on a line where he can drive it without having that quote unquote superstar that you know what I mean? Like maybe, and I'm not saying he's coming to Boston because I keep telling you he's not. Like, I don't think that. I mean, and if he comes to Boston, I'm not going to hate him if he comes to Boston. I like Mitch Marner's game. Yes, the whole team is invisible during the playoffs. It's not like it's just on Marner.
The thing with Marner coming to Boston, I sit here and I go, I just don't think they're going to extend themselves to go that far. Now, he may come down and say, like, I will go to Boston because I get to go against Toronto and be able to say, like, we weren't good enough. This is what we have to do. And basically shove it in their face. He could do that. I would certainly be fine with that. I think the number one issue on this team, in order to get the short turnaround window that they're looking for, I do think that some of this extension also gives Sweeney a 1-year reprieve. So he doesn't make a stupid move and go out and overextend on a Mitch Marner or a Nikolai Ehlers. They can look at the options they have in-house. They can, target their next Morgan Geekie and then go, let's see how he does, but let's see how a Danzlach Mellis does and who earns the job. If we don't make the playoffs, but we play better and we have progress, and we miss, in the last week of the regular season, does that mean Don Sweeney has to go? No, not necessarily.
Well, but we can play that hindsight game. What if Hampus Lindholm was healthy? What if Elias Lindholm was healthy? What if Charlie McAvoy was healthy? Would we have what if Jeremy Swayman signed his contract a lot earlier and didn't miss camp? We have all those what ifs. Would people be calling for Don Sweeney's head had they made the playoffs this year?
Yes, they would. There would still be a sector of fan base because they live
but not as many. But not as many. But not as many.
Oh, absolutely.
Not as many.
And we hear about the injuries at the end of the season, but let's be honest, we don't know exactly how bad it was.
The only one that we knew about after the fact, there was only 3 after the fact: John Beecher, Pavel Zacha, and Elias Lindholm. Mm-hmm. All the other ones we knew about. We knew about Hampus. We knew about Charlie. We knew about Mark Kastelik. You know what I mean? Like, we knew about those injuries all through the season.
That's another one, too.
Weren't in the lineup. We didn't know that Pavel Zacha had to have a procedure done. We didn't know that Elias Lindholm hurt. Like, we knew he had an injury before camp that caused him to miss camp, but we were never told. No one was told that he didn't start the season at 100% and it was a back issue. I mean, had you known that, maybe they wouldn't be so down on Elias Lindholm. Kastelik, obviously, with his concussions, you're not
very underrated injury right there too.
Right, and at the trade deadline, they had the bump of the 2 games, but again, we have something to prove, and then we're back to reality because we still have those same injuries.
Yep.
And then you saw a couple of players performing better down the stretch. Nikita Zadorov, Elias Lindholm. Obviously, Geeky, when he started performing more towards the turn of the calendar year, but he started the season off crappy. So did
many of them
Pastrnak.
did.
So did Pastrnak. So did Marchand. They all started the season off horrible.
Right.
Even you saw spots of Swayman playing better. And Swayman, I know people are like, oh, he let up 5 goals, but he still has a better save percentage than half the goalies in Worlds right now.
It's also one of those things where with Swayman, like, first of all, I think we've all seen the article that Ty put out where the Bruins are receiving calls on Jeremy Swayman. And I look at that and I go, no shit. That's 31 other GMs doing their job because they're going to talk. GMs talk to each other. That's how they build their team. And for you, if you're Mike Greer in San Jose, you would not be doing your job. I know you have Askarov, but you would not be doing your job if you didn't say, hey, it was a down year. You made a lot of changes. As Elliot Friedman pointed out, you made a lot of changes. Is this one you might consider? No, not at this time. Okay, just let us know if that changes. Mm-hmm. You're talking about a different player 3 weeks later. Hey, anything changed on the Swayman front? No, that's just doing the job.
Right. And I don't care what anyone says. Swayman last year was not Swayman.
No.
You will see the real Swayman this year. We will see
absolutely.
The Swayman that took the net from Allmark. We will see that Swayman again.
And on top of that, they're already started. And this is one of the things where I look at the Sweeney extension and I go, he's already starting to do the job in the ways that he needs to. That's why you should be. I'm not going to tell you have to be excited about it, but what you have to look at and go, is he doing the job? Do I have to agree with every move that he's ever made? No, I don't. He has his reasons for doing certain things, and trust me, they have a lot more information than I do. Yeah. So I'm gonna defer to their information over mine, but he did tear down and make some of the hard decisions at the trade deadline. That was my biggest worry. I thought they were going to try to do some half-pregnant sell Zacha, but try to bring in a Hustadinov type player and then keep Carlo. You know what I mean? Like you try to deal half of them, you try not to. It's like, okay, well, we know Zacha's here because he and Pastrnak are so close. Like you're not going to shake that up unless you absolutely have to.
But that's not. I disagree with you. I don't think Zacha's here just because him and Pastrnak are close.
No, he didn't have to leave at this time. This wasn't we have to move on from Zacha moment. This was we have to turn over to the next group. Can Zacha be a part of that?
We don't know yet. But I want you to take Pasternak's name out of that because then you're saying that Pastrnak is dictating the roster, which no player should ever dictate the roster.
Let me clarify then, because when you have your star player who's close to certain guys, you want to do as little to shake that up as you you do what you have to do. And at this moment in time, moving on from Zacha wasn't something they had to do.
You look at Zacha, you look at Charlie Coyle. Who are you getting more for?
Coyle.
Right. So it wasn't a matter of Pastrnak. It was a matter of what was best for the team.
But let me ask you this. Why not do both?
Because they didn't need to. They didn't need to. Because Zacha, his contract was let's look up their contract.
His contract ends after 26-27.
Right.
So he's got next year and one more.
And when is Charlie's?
I believe his is after next season, 25-26.
Right. So who is performing better this past season?
Between the two, they were about the same. I'd say Zacha was a little bit better, though.
Right, but Zacha was your top. Zacha was always in your top 6. Charlie was only there because they didn't have a Bergeron. They didn't have a Krejci. He was your bottom 6 up until Bergeron retired. Zacha was playing on your wing or your center on your top 2 lines. You're going to keep – he has more potential to score than Charlie does.
Oh yeah.
And that was what they were lacking with secondary scoring. So getting rid of Zacha over Coyle or Zacha over.
There are other factors, absolutely. But I'm saying that would, like if you're looking at the two and saying they are equal in your eyes, which BG411 says I would argue Zacha has more value than Coyle, possibly. But let's say it's a flip of a coin, right? And you can literally go heads or tails. One is Zacha, one is Coyle, and we're going to get the same package in return for either one. Then that's when you can look at it and go, well, Pastrnak and Zacha are close enough that this shakes up the locker room a little less.
You got to stop talking about Pastrnak though, because I don't think that that's fair to put it on that. Basically, you're saying that because
no, I'm talking about the locker room chemistry as a whole.
I understand that, but Coyle had a very good relationship with that. He was one of the leaders in that locker room, more than Zacha was. He had more of a voice in that locker room than Zacha did. So I just would be very careful about treading that line.
That's fine. That's fair. Andrew also adds, rarely does any team have a succession plan for first ballot Hall of Famers like Bergeron. Look at Pittsburgh. They won't have a succession plan for when Sidney Crosby hangs them up. Washington won't have one for when Ovi packs it in, which, no, when you have a legend player like Patrice Bergeron, like, Ovechkin or Crosby or McDavid or Gretzky, like
you can't look at Chicago and Jonathan Toews,
who's supposed to be making a comeback this year. Like,
go back and look at that. That was when Chicago started to falter, when they lost Toews, when they lost Kane. You know what I mean? Like, that's the problem, is that you pay off the farm to keep winning those championships or keeping that window open when you have those type of players. And now they're going through a rebuild. Boston is still not going through a rebuild. They're going through a retool. They only need a couple of pieces to be in the playoffs, where Chicago is still missing a lot of pieces before making it back to the playoffs.
And the ones that they do have are still in the maturity stage. They did a complete rebuild, which some people were looking for Boston to do. And that's, you look at them, you look at San Jose. They didn't have a succession plan. They thought they had a succession plan for Joe Thornton and Patrick Marleau, but they didn't.
Right.
And that's why I do find it interesting what Toronto's going to do, because, without Marner, they're going to get nothing for him in return. I think they bring back Tavares at a much lower number. I just think he wants to be there enough that there's some wiggle room there.
But he has to do it. He has to do it.
I know.
But I'm not sure Tavares has the same type of loyalty that Bergeron and Krejci had.
That's where I go. I don't know. I can see him going back. I can see him walking too. But then if you're the Leafs, like, how do you not look at it and go, we've tried with this group of people. We don't have enough in the system. Now you have to deal off a guy like, an Austin. Like, you build around Matthew Nyes. You build around William Nylander.
Matthew Nyes doesn't get an offer sheet. That's if Matthew Nyes doesn't get an offer sheet. That
they can match an offer sheet.
They can, but they have to be comfortable matching it. It depends on who has the cap space and is willing to pay for that potential.
Yeah, I will say though, like, if you're,
if I'm Toronto, I'm matching it. I'm not giving him up. 100%. But
granted, if someone comes along and they offer a package that's going to give me 2 firsts, a second, and a third, if I'm Toronto, I go, I'll take the picks, because I got to rebuild this thing.
Right.
But that's what makes Toronto so interesting, because Treliving's already blown up one team.
Mm-hmm.
And, he thought he was getting a good return for Tkachuk in Huberdeau and Weegar. They've turned to be okay, but he also knows that you can't give up the best player and not get the best prospect.
Right.
And so watching him try to do it again would be very interesting. And you can't trade Austin Matthews. He's your captain.
Why? The Bruins traded Brad Marchand.
I know.
And the Bruins traded Joe Thornton. I mean,
I know.
I
Look,
mean,
if I'm Toronto, I'm fielding calls on everybody. Honestly, the first name out of my mouth that I'm shopping is Joseph Wall.
or William Nylander.
The reason why I'm shopping Wall, though, is because I still have Dennis Hildeby. And Hildeby is a restricted free agent. I don't want people offer sheeting him.
Right.
And so by the time I get back into, what I think can be a contending window, like if you're Toronto, you have to take a 1 year step back.
Right.
More so than Boston did. Boston took a year back because of injury. But I would be shopping Nylander. I'd be shopping Matthews. I'd be shopping Joseph Wall. I'd be keeping a lot of the guys that you brought in who are still under contract.
Actually, Nylander has too much. I wouldn't. Nylander signed through 30-31.
I still see what the market is for him. I don't want to move him, but I'm bringing him up. I'm shopping because you've got to at least see what your players are worth. I'm not saying he's the first word out, calling, you're talking, and then you just kind of go, well, what if we were willing to move off of Nylander? You just kind of throw it in there as a casual, what if we consider this? Would you be in on it if he decides he's up for moving? Because let's not forget, Matthews and Nylander both have full no-move clauses.
Right.
And they've already been shafted by Marner and taking advantage of his. So, let's see. I don't think Toronto can afford to take a step back since we have their first next season. It doesn't mean it's going to be a top five. It's still top 5 protected. And you really think that one step back for Toronto, if they have Matthew Knies, if they have one of Nylander or Matthews or both, and, the Scott Lawton and Brandon Carlo and, Morgan Riley's another one that I'd be shopping if I were them, by the way. They're not going to fall to 5th. They're not going to lose a top 10 pick in one season. But you also need to take a step back and be okay with having a 20th pick, and being on the verge of maybe making the playoffs and getting – they got to work guys like Easton Cowan in. Minton's obviously gone. They've got a few other young guys that some of the names are escaping me at the moment. But they have some young promising players that they need to start working in, because if they don't, Jacob Quillen is another. Let's see, because he'll be an RFA after next season. Let's see. I mentioned Dennis Hildeby earlier. They've got a couple that they need to try to find out what they have, because right now those are your trade chips to keep this thing going, and they don't have the engine to keep it going right now. You mentioned Boston doing a retool, though. We had talked about it a couple weeks ago when it comes to the drafting, which is the one thing that Don Sweeney keeps getting knocked for. But in such a competitive window, he's drafting later and he's giving up the high-end picks. He's getting the guys that need time to develop. This is why I like the 2-year extension for him, because in 2 years, you'll see exactly where Mason Lohrei can go. You'll see, the development of Riley Duran. Where does he end up? Can he maybe push to be a third liner? You'll have some more of you'll have Downslotch Mellis, Frederick Brunet, Jackson Edward, Cole Spicer. Everybody also wants to crap on Don Sweeney for the 2018, 19, and 20 drafts, because, Don Sweeney can't draft, right? That's the narrative. Well, let's not forget that in 2018, you had a 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 6th, and 7th. And in 2019, you had 1 first, and then you had 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th. Now, Schmaltz is still developing in college, or he just came out of college this year. And then Mantekivi, Beachkoff, and Olsen, they were all Mantekivi and Beachkoff were all overseas. Were both overseas, as was Pavel Shen, who was another center that they drafted in the idea of maybe he can come in and help replace Bergeron. And they all lost a season and a half of development
Right.
because of COVID.
Right.
And I know other teams lost that too. But who do you think would come out of a COVID missed season better? Connor McDavid or John Beecher? They're both first round picks. And
Oh,
one of them had to take a year off because COVID shut down the league they were playing in.
McDavid's definitely coming back stronger.
Exactly.
It's the same thing during the lockout way back when Bergeron went down and played in Providence. There
was another league you could put him in.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. Like, other players took the year off too because of the lockout. You know what I mean? And Bergeron went down to Providence and worked on his game and came back stronger. You know,
right. And you can't control what the players are going to do. There's a great example in Justin Brazeau, right?
Mm-hmm.
He came out 2 years ago. People loved him. They saw what he could do. I was a fan of his game. I said he needed to work on his board battles and staying on his feet. Dom kept talking about how he was, falling down and skating. And, those were the two things that Dom and I kept talking about his game. And we were giving him coming into this season as an opportunity to show improvement.
Right.
He didn't.
No.
He did not fix those areas of his game. If he had, he could easily project himself into a second line role on any team.
Yeah.
He didn't put the work in.
No, and they started him off this season with higher responsibility. And he did not, the healthy members of the team in the first few months of the season underachieved.
Right. And Matthew Poitras is a great example. That dude, nothing can be said negative about his work ethic.
No.
So you have a guy who, on his own, you don't have to push. You can look at him and say, hey, this is what we need you to take care of this offseason. Figure out the best way to do it.
Right.
And if he goes to Canada to be with his family and do this and that, and then he goes to Europe for a month because he wants to vacation over there, he's going to come back to camp and he's going to be ready. Mm-hmm. If you say that to Justin Brazeau, maybe he takes the entire summer off and just does a little lifting. That's one of the concerns that you have right now about Fabien Lysell. What's he going to do this offseason?
I think that him down the stretch, the 12 games that he played, he got a taste of it. Mm-hmm. He's not taking this summer off.
I don't think so.
Working his ass off. He wants to make that roster out of camp. He wants to make their decision the hardest decision possible. Now, the other player that I worry about is Mark. He's the one I worry about because it's just he have in him what Lysell had in him. Because Lysell, each game he played, got stronger and stronger. Yes, he still didn't score that like everyone thought he was going to score. But every single game, he showed that he grew. And one of the things that I loved about Sacco is that Lysell, when he made a mistake, he owned it and went back out on the ice and didn't hide. He was like, all right, well, I still got to play my game. And that's growth. So maybe they should have brought him up earlier to give him that longer period of time. But again, up until coming out of Four Nations, they were in the mix for a playoff spot. Who is he pushing out of the lineup? You know what I mean? It wasn't until the trade deadline when they're like, all right, because he wasn't pushing Charlie Coyle out of the lineup. He was, you know what I mean? I don't care what anyone says. He's not pushing Charlie Coyle out of that lineup during, you know what I mean? He just
not when you're in playoff contention.
And that's I get where, because I wanted to see him too. I wanted Poitras to get called back up too. But again, him playing in Providence was better for his game than him on this shitty ass team this year.
Yeah, 100%. And that's where I do think, like you said, the concern about Merkulov is absolutely there because there is a spot that he can grab on this team.
There is. But again, it also depends on what Sweeney does in the offseason, what he does in free agency. Say he does bring in Brock Boeser or Mitch Marner, or, he gets one of those, who's Mark pushing out? Who's, you know what I mean? That's the whole thing. if you like, you want to give your prospects the chance, but if he's bringing in players that are, 100% are going to make your team better, then who is the prospect pushing out? And who's to say to get a player like that, they don't have to give up Merkulov. They don't have to give up. We talked about, if certain players are available, do you put Matty Patra in that trade? Do I want to see Patra leave? Absolutely not. But if it's going to get a high-end elite scorer, then 100% yes, because this team needs more offense.
Right. Let's see. And then Stefan says, so is that why Merkulov couldn't stick with the club? Was he hiding after he made mistakes?
I don't think that he was hiding after he made the mistakes. When they called him up, it was because of injuries and they were still in the mix and he wasn't pushing people out of their spot. He wasn't earning that extra ice time. He wasn't doing all the things that the Bruins needed him to be doing. After the trade deadline, they could have sent Lysell back down, but they were like, you know what? We're not making the playoffs. We might as well give him the longest look that we can give him.
Right. And a great comparable, Stefan, would be Matthew Patra when he came out of camp 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. For his 9-game sample, every game you sat there and said, how can we send this kid back? He is doing everything we want and need him to do. And by the time the 9th game came around and you said to yourself, how do we send this kid back? He is doing everything we want and need him to do. You sat there and said, how do we find a spot for him on this roster?
Right.
Because we don't have a choice. At this point, we have to pick. Is he here or is he down there? What does he gain from being down in juniors? What does he gain from being up here?
And I think we need to reiterate the fact that they had no choice with Potter. He was not qualified for the AHL. So he had to go to juniors or he had to play in the NHL. Because if he would have been in Providence, they would not have kept him with the NHL club
if it was an option.
If it was an option. We need to keep that in mind, that he was not making that NHL roster if Providence was an option that season.
And I can almost guarantee if you give the front office and the player truth serum and the coach and everybody there, they would sit there and say, yeah, we did not plan to play him as much as we did. One, he earned the playing time.
Right.
And two, because he earned the playing time, he was out there and it got him injured. Correct. And then that threw off the second half of his season and development. Now, that's fine. It happens. But I think if they were given that true serum, they would say the plan was for him to play 50 games, and then after the 50 games, he would take everything he learned and spend the next season starting in Providence to fine-tune everything and then try to come back up.
But if he had finished those 50 games and he kept playing and got stronger with each game,
then he's not going to Providence.
Then he's not going to Providence. He still could have stayed. Like, he made the NHL club out of camp this year. You know what I mean? But It was like they saw that the missing that second half of the season after his shoulder injury, they had to, they wanted to give him the best opportunity to succeed. And that's the whole thing that people forget. They're not punishing players by sending them to Providence. They're not punishing players by saying, now, some coaches did. Some coaches would say, all right, I'm not playing you, go sit on the 9th floor. That's a punishment. There were some coaches that punished players, Bruce Cassidy. But the whole thing is that when they sent Matthew Potter down to the AHL this year, it wasn't to punish him. It was to benefit him, his future, and the future of the franchise.
Right. Let's also not forget that this is a 5'11", 180-pound soaking wet kid at the age of 20 at the time. He's 20. He's 21 now.
Right.
Learning to take hits from 30-year-old men. Mm-hmm. Now, this is where I think someone like Don Zlachmelis has a little bit of an advantage because, one, he's a little bit bigger. He's like 6'1", 6'2". He's also been playing. He played in college. But the biggest thing is he's been playing for the Latvia men's team for so long. He's used to playing against men. Right. And so there's a scenario in my eyes where Zlachmelis makes the team out of camp next year because look at what he's doing right now in Worlds against men.
Right. No, and I wouldn't be surprised if he did make. He's one of those ones that I wouldn't be surprised and I wouldn't be upset if he made the roster because he's not going to be in a top 6 position anyways.
Right.
I don't see him on the 4th line. I see him more in a 3rd line, but he also he could work his way up. It depends on chemistry. He could build
100%.
phenomenal chemistry on a 2nd line and move up to a 2nd line. You know what I mean? Like it depends on the chemistry because you got to look at the fact that no one expected Charlie Coyle to build the chemistry that he built with Brad Marchand during the season after the historic season. You know what I mean? When his numbers went up, and then that everyone's like, oh, well, Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand, they play so well together. You know what I mean? And so John Sweeney's like, well, I don't need to replace him. I have him. And so he went out and replaced another center, not a person, just a position, by bringing in Elias Lindholm, who he thought, hey, Elias now can move in with Zacha and Pasternak. They can build that chemistry together. Had Elias not been injured, we probably would have seen Pasternak and Elias do what they did at the end of the season, at the beginning of the season. And again,
most of the year.
right. Like you don't know, unfortunately, because of the injuries. But then Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederick didn't put up the numbers that they did the year before.
Right. That's another thing is how much did Trent Frederick have his foot out the door? Like we don't really know, and
I don't think
he
that
started that way.
I don't think that he had his foot out the door because I think he truly loved playing for Boston. I think he truly loved the fan base. I think he loved his teammates. I don't think he had a foot out the door. He had it because Charlie Coyle didn't have his foot off the door. They just didn't have it this season. You know what I mean? They just didn't have it. They couldn't find their groove the way Morgan Geekie found his groove. They couldn't find their groove the way Brad Marchand finally found his groove. You know what I mean? Like they just couldn't find, and it could have been that they didn't play together the previous year, so they couldn't find their chemistry again. That they missed where, they missed where their chemistry was. Okay, I can read this play. It could have been that the other winger that they had just didn't gel with it. There's so many different reasons for what could have happened because
there was a time when they were playing with Jake DeBrusk too, where it was DeBrusk, Coyle, and Frederick, and that line cranked.
Right, and that's the whole thing. Like knowing if you said last year that Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederick were not going to produce because each year they've gotten better.
Yep.
For them to drop off the way that they dropped off, no one expected that. The fan base didn't, the front office didn't, the coaching staff didn't. No one expected them because that's one of the things, and Don Sweeney got ripped through the shreds for it, for saying we had expectations of players to play and they didn't meet their potential. He was talking about Coyle, he was talking about Frederick, you know what I mean? And that's part of the reason why he was like, well, I don't have to replace Jake DeBrusk because Frederick and Coyle and this one and that one, they're going to continue to step up.
We'll replace them in the aggregate.
Right. But it didn't happen.
Right.
It didn't happen.
But there is also a legitimate scenario next year for us to see a second line with Middlestead in the middle, Brock Besser, or whichever one he trains with in the offseason. I can't remember if it's Besser or who's the other one there? You know who I'm talking about. But whatever. Casey Middlestead's in the middle. That guy's on the right. And then you have Lach Mellis on the left. Like, there's a legitimate scenario where you could have that as a line. Mm-hmm. You could have, Lach Mellis and Middlestead and Marner on a line. Like, there are so many different options. Again, the key is we don't know who they're going to bring in. I don't think they're going to target someone as high-end as a Mitch Marner as much as they need the talent. I think the 2-year extension gives a little bit more flexibility for them to go out and get a high-end free agent, not necessarily Mitch Marner, but a high-end free agent, and see how that works, or just a high-end target. Let me put it that way. A high-end playmaking.
My dog's going nuts.
He's probably annoyed by that beeping.
No, because I can't even hear it anymore. No, she's at her. We have a dog door in our wall, the one where she can come and go as she pleases. And
Uh-oh.
she's like kind of staring out in the backyard. And we have a groundhog and rabbits. So I'm not sure if
Ah,
she's,
she's just gonna bolt and go after one of them.
yeah. And she's not fast enough to catch them. Okay.
Oh, well, then there
She
you go.
settled down. Sorry about that. No,
That's okay.
but the other thing is too, is you keep saying Casey Middlestat. We don't know where Patra is going to be next year either.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because what he learned in Providence this whole season, he could come into camp and he could build this major chemistry with someone in camp, have a phenomenal preseason.
Again, there's a case where you see Middlestad in the preseason get put on waivers.
Yeah.
Like, and is that the end of the world? Not for Boston. You got to do what's best for Boston. If you can put Patra in that lineup and get more from him than you can from Casey Middlestad, are you forcing Middlestad somewhere else in your lineup, or would you rather just cut bait with him and say we tried? Like, hopefully another team claims him off of waivers. Like, that's an option.
But it's also not a bad thing to have him down in Providence with a Patrick Brown, being a leader down there, being someone that you can call up if things start to go south.
They would have him. They also,
or you know what I mean? To have that depth is not a bad thing, because that's part of the problem over the years too, is that if you lost a Bergeron or if you lost a Krejci, the kids that they drafted to be their replacements in 5 years weren't ready to be called up, which is why you have a Lettieri, which is why you have a Brown, which is why, you know what I mean? And people forget that part of it, that you're not just looking at the NHL club for what they can do, but what people in Providence can who do you have to call up? Like having, I know that like they talk about defense. Who's ready to be called up if Charlie McAvoy is injured at the beginning of the season? So you got to have that depth. You got to have some of those veteran players that can step up and take those minutes.
Right. And too many people look at it in terms of, okay, well, so McAvoy's hurt, so now you elevate Jokiharju, you elevate Peak, and then you bring up, a third pairing guy.
Right.
Well, that's one way of doing it, yes, but that's not how GMs look at it. GMs look at it and go, Charlie McAvoy gives us 25 minutes a night.
Right.
How do I replace his 25 minutes a night? How do I replace him on the power play? How do I replace him on the penalty kill? And how do I replace what he brings to us 5-on-5, puck movement, two-way defensive game? How do I replace all of that in the aggregate? And you know what? It might not be, going, oh, well, just slide Parker Wotherspoon over, move everybody up. Like, you might do that for a game just because you're kind of in a little bit of a pinch, but that's not a long-term solution.
We saw it with Hampus Lindholm.
Right. Your long-term solution going into next year might be looking at someone going, hey, Ty Gallagher, you've got to step up. We're not going to put you in that top line role, but we're going to put you in that second line role and let Jokiharju have, between the two of you, you guys got to make up for the minutes. You've got to make up for the puck moving. You've got to make up for all of that. That way there we can leave, Andrew Peak in his third pairing role and not overextend him.
Right.
When you look at it in that part, you don't have anybody ready right now. Right. You don't have that for why do you think Elias Lindholm played all 82 games? Who were you going to play in his place?
Right.
Your best option would have been Matthew Patra, but it was already a season where you sat there and you went, we don't have enough to win the cup. We might have enough to make the playoffs, but we don't have enough to win the cup, and we don't have enough extra push. You were still trying to get Lindholm into the lineup, worked in. If his injury wasn't so bad he had to sit and go on LTIR, then you didn't have to bring up Matthew Patra. Mm-hmm. That's, and that's why you bring in Middlestat. That's part of why I lean toward Patra staying in Providence and being your 1C in Providence, at least to start the season, because that gives you the option to go Middlestat, or you'll go Lindholm, Middlestat down the middle with a Fraser Minten, with Mark Kastelic, and then you have your spine, and you have a couple replacements in the pipeline in Lachmelis and Patra who can play that middle role if and when you need them.
But I'd rather Patra than Minten.
for a third line role, I like Mitten
I
better
have
than
no
Poitras
I
on the
have
third
no
line.
problems with Matthew Poitras playing on the third line because his wingers are going to be bigger on the third line than they will be on the second line. Can give him a little bit more protection, and then you have him as an option for a power play unit, and you know what I mean. So like,
Again, I'm not against that. I'm just saying
right,
like that's why I lean towards that. But
right.
at the same time, we don't know
But
what
the
other
other
moves they're
thing
going to
is,
make.
but the other thing is too is that you never know what Patra's going to do this off season. You know what I mean? We don't know what he's going to do this off season, and he comes in, he may push Middlestat right out. He may,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? And then the other thing is too is that,
and you hope he does.
right. And the other thing is too is when you say like the defense, right? We go back to the defense a little bit. That's why Patrick Brown is in Providence. You know what I mean? They need one of those veteran defensemen in Providence to be able to pull to come
Well,
up.
they had that. They had Jordan Osterley for that. And then when
Right.
they had to send him down, he got claimed off of waivers by Nashville. So
Right.
you lost the
Right.
break glass in case of emergency
Right.
player. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. And when I say that the team, that people should be, again, not necessarily excited, but looking at Don Sweeney saying he's doing the job right, that's why they brought in this new goaltender, Simon, I believe it's Zadnicek.
And that's not necessarily just for Corpusalo and Swayman. We still don't know what's going to happen with Bussy and DiPietro.
Oh no, this kid's 100% in Providence next season because
Right.
one of those two guys is not coming back.
Oh, I know. I saw people going, "Oh, Corpusalo's getting shopped." Corpusalo's not getting shopped. Yes, Sweeney's going to take phone calls because he's going to take phone calls on both his goaltenders. Because
Absolutely.
one thing that the Bruins have that a lot of other organizations don't have is goaltending depth.
Well, and the other thing is it comes back to these four words. That is his job.
Right. Yeah.
Like when someone says they're taking calls on a player, I go, no shit. That's like saying a scout's in the stands. No shit.
Right.
Oh my God. Hey, guess what? Gayle's writing an article. Like, oh my God, someone's doing their job. Like, what are we doing? Why is this? That's why I find it hilarious when someone tweets out, scouts from these 7 teams are at this game. No shit. They're doing their job.
I mean, I don't mind knowing what scouts are where.
I don't mind knowing, but
I don't mind knowing.
Oh my God, that means there's a deal coming between Ottawa and St. Louis, and there's six guys. There's going to be a 3-way deal. It's like, no.
Yeah.
Does that mean a deal won't come from it? Not necessarily, but.
And I don't believe, and I'm sorry, I will flat out disagree, and someone can tell me that I'm stupid, but I don't believe that Rick Tocchet didn't come to Boston because Don Sweeney didn't have a new deal in place. That is not the reason why. And I'm not even sure that Boston was pursuing him.
I think it was, hey, let's have a conversation about our job.
Right.
And he went, okay, because I don't have a job yet. And I don't have a job offer yet.
But I'm not sure that Sweeney and Neely are like, oh, that's our guy. 100% I disagree with that.
I think they looked at it and said, he can be our guy. And I mean, there's a reason why, we're hearing Jay Woodcroft's name. Okay, why isn't he signed yet? Why isn't the deal done? If he's their guy, why isn't it done?
There's a lot of names out there. If I'm the Bruins, if I were Don Sweeney, I'm looking at all my options. And I'm not settling for the first available. I'm not settling for the first guy that says, I want this job. I'm doing my due diligence and I'm trying to find the best coach to move forward so I don't fire my fourth coach. You know what I mean? And that may be a Todd Nelson who has back-to-back Calder championships with Hershey and has 3 total. It could be a Marco Sturm who's done wonders with the Ontario Reign. It could be Mark Savard. And I know a lot of people are like, nope, not Mark Savard, not Mark Savard. You don't know that. We don't know if it's not. They could be having conversations with Mark.
They could be. I just don't see it because the team has had ample opportunity. And I know.
But that doesn't matter because just because he was an assistant in St. Louis And yes, I know he did well with the Spitfires, but one thing that Sweeney said is he wanted someone that had at least a little bit of NHL experience. Well, you know what? Savard now has more than ample enough NHL experience.
I'm not saying I'd complain if it was Savard. I'm just saying I think the bridge there is a little more burnt than fans want it to be.
If I'm Mark Savard and the Bruins say, listen, we didn't think you were ready then, we think you're ready now. Do you think he holds a grudge? I don't think so. I don't think so. 100% no. 100% no. 100% no.
I think
you also have, but then you also have Misha in Dallas. You know what I mean? It could be they're like, you know what? This is our guy. This is the one we're going for. They're still playing. They're in the Western Conference Finals. So they could have had a Zoom call with him, but now they can't have an in-person with him until, you know,
right.
There's so many.
And the other thing is like he may know he wants to go to Boston. Like they just because they can have conversations with, because they're also going to be talking to the agent. Right. You know, they could literally have a contract ready to go, and they just can't have him sign it because he's still working for the Stars.
Right.
Like we genuinely don't know.
And I don't buy the but Boston didn't make the playoffs. Well, neither did Philadelphia.
Right. And Philadelphia is a little further back in their rebuild than Boston is. They don't like we want to say they don't have a David Pastrnak, and they very well might in Mitchkov, but like who's their goaltender? Who's their Jeremy Swayman?
Right.
Who is their Charlie McAvoy?
Right.
Who's their Hampus Lindholm?
Right.
Like they don't have those guys, not anymore.
No. And you know, and I just like, you know, the fact that people like, why would anyone want to come to Boston? Why wouldn't you want to come to Boston? Like, I still love Nikita Zadorov's quote. I love Nikita Zadorov's quote. It is an original six franchise, a historic 100-year franchise that is just literally missing a couple of pieces. And how many times did the fans complain about Jim Montgomery and his salad bowl of lineups?
I know.
That they blame him for losing to the Panthers twice, but yet they got pissed off at Sweeney when he fired him. Like, you can't have it both ways.
Or as Sweeney puts it, I love how you go to Nikita Zadorov's line, but as Sweeney puts it, I'll let you know when someone doesn't want to come here.
Right.
Like, there's a reason he said the line the way he did. Because at the end of the day, not, you know, did Rick Tocchet look at the job and go, that's my number one option? Probably not.
He could have, and it could have been that he asked for too much and the Bruins aren't willing to pay that much for a head coach.
Could be that too.
There's a lot of different reasons to why. I mean, there was other coaches that were turned down for Boston that were in the running that the Bruins chose Montgomery over.
Yep. Donskov was one of them.
You know what I mean? So can we stop at the narrative that coaches don't want to come to Boston?
And the other
part of it is a huge market. It's a historic original six franchise. You have an elite goal scorer. You have an elite defenseman. You have more than one elite defenseman on this team.
Can we also put this out there too? You have a scapegoat. Like if you're a first-time head coach, let's say you're Todd Nelson, right? The guy from Hershey. You come up to Boston and you have a horrendous season.
They're gonna blame Sweeney.
Boston then fires Don Sweeney. Guess what? When you're looking for your next gig, whether it's a year from now or 2 years from now, you're able to sit there and go, well, they fired Sweeney. Like, I wasn't exactly put in a position for success. Right. If you're telling me I'm in a position for success, well, you know, on this crappy team, I still managed to be competitive. So, like, if it was so bad that they fired their general manager, how are you putting the blame on me?
Right.
And now name a GM who's not going to be like, well, I'm better than that. Let me, you know, have this guy coach my team. Like, you have a scapegoat.
Right.
So, like, and the narrative that, well, because the general manager's not signed. Okay, but you still get paid your contract.
Right. So, like, and the general manager had a year. It wasn't that the general manager was in the middle of a no contract, that there was no, he was still
Right.
here for this season.
His contract didn't end on July 1st.
Correct.
So but like, okay, so I think the coach is probably going to sign a 3-year contract. I think that's the contract they're shopping. And so like it makes sense for what you're trying to make this team be. If you
Montgomery
get
was a 3-year contract.
right, if you can get this team where they want it to be back in the playoffs, you still have 2 years to get it over to cup contention status.
Mm-hmm.
You also then can build off of that and gain another contract.
It also depends too. People forget too that the coach doesn't have the right to just come in and say, I want Chris Kelly gone. I want Jay Leach gone. I want this person, and this person. The GM ultimately makes the whole decision on the whole coaching staff. Right.
And I think it's clear they want Leach involved. They probably want Sacco involved somehow.
Oh, I'm sure they would love for Sacco to stay as the associate assistant that he was before he stepped into the interim role. I'm sure they want Asesna to stay. I'm sure they want, you know what I mean? They may have, but but a new coach may say, I don't want to work with this player, with this coach. I
want my guys.
I want my guys. And that could be another reason why Don Sweeney says, all right, then you're not right for us, because we have these systems in place. It could be about systems. It could be because, Claude Julien had his system. Bruce Cassidy came in. He didn't change it 100%, but he tweaked it.
Yep.
And the same thing with Montgomery. Now, Montgomery changed the system a little bit more than what Bruce Cassidy did. Now, did Montgomery change it on his own? Was it fed to him from Sweeney? Like, hey, we're giving you these players. You need to change your system to fit this. That's the other thing. When Sweeney gets players, he gets players based on the system that's already in place, not a brand new system.
Right. He's got guys drafted from 2022. He's got a Frederick Brunet or a Don Zlotch-Mellis drafted, Cole Spicer, who can do certain things based on the system they want to play. And so, yeah, you're okay with tweaking it a little bit. Absolutely. Right. You want to have your defenseman pinch up a little bit more and get in on the rush a little bit more. That's an adjustment you can make because you have Charlie McAvoy and Hampus Lindholm and even Nikita Zadorov to some degree. Right. That's not what that's why your defense isn't built on 6 Brandon Carlos or Andrew Peaks. Like, you need to have a Brandon Carlo or an Andrew Peak on your roster to kill penalties. You need to have one of them.
Right.
But you also need to have a Mason Lohrei who can move the puck. Now, do you have 2 who can play on the same pair together so they kind of counterbalance? Let's say you do. All right. Well, you still have to have 4 other defensemen. What are their roles?
Well, and let's keep in mind, too, something that we talked about. I don't even know if it was last week or the week before or whatever pod that we talked about it. But the Bruins, historically, are built from the back end out.
Yep.
Right? We all recognize that. They're built from goaltender to defense, then scoring, because they rather keep
starting down
their
the middle
oppositions off the board and win a 1-goal game or a 2-goal game than to have it be 8-7. You know what I mean? Like, they build on the defense out. They want to be hard to play against to make the opponents work for every single goal that they can get. And then, so that's why another reason why they're not so high up the board on scoring, because they never had to be, right?
Right. No,
because
100%.
Even let's be realistic. What made Patrice Bergeron so great? It wasn't his scoring prowess. It was his 200-foot play, right?
That's what made him what he was.
He could score. He could pass the puck, but it was a 200-foot, you know what I mean? That's what made him so great. David Krejci, during the regular season, could be invisible at times, but in the playoffs, he became, David Krejci. That's why everyone calls him Playoff Krejci. But again, his game was 200 feet. It wasn't just offense. The same thing, that is Elias Lindholm.
Playoff Krejci was a 200-foot game. Regular season Krejci was just more, I want to focus on the offense, the fun part.
No, you could.
He played a 2-way game. He played a 2-way game, but it was much more prevalent in the playoffs.
Yes, But then you look at Elias Lindholm. What is he? He's not an offensive, like, here I am, I'm going to put up 100 points. He is a 200-foot player.
And what do people tend to criticize Connor McDavid for?
Not being a 200-foot player.
Exactly. So you're trying to find the balance.
David Pastrnak for that. For not, because they don't use him on the penalty kill.
Oh,
he
turnovers.
Doesn't need to be on the penalty kill.
Turnovers.
He goes out there at the end of a penalty kill in case, they get the puck and he can pick up the puck, but he shouldn't be out there on the PK.
That is one of the reasons why I do wonder how much of a pursuit they have to a guy like Marner, because Marner does have a 200-foot game that's pretty solid. And again, he's not going to be David Pastrnak, but you can put Mitch Marner on a penalty kill and then follow that up by immediately throwing David Pastrnak out there. Mm-hmm. And then if you follow that up with, a third line that has Fabian Lysell on it, like, now you're constantly keeping the offensive pressure on there, but you're not putting Pastrnak or Lysell on your penalty kill.
Right.
Like, that's just not what they do.
Right.
But you could with a Mitch Marner. You could, I probably not so much with Brock Besser, but you could. It's not like he's never done it before.
Right.
But, and that's one of the things with a Matthew Poitras, right? Like, his offensive game, 100% there. But when you watch him in Providence, he's getting some of those other, like, right now you're not putting Matthew Poitras on your penalty kill in the NHL.
Correct.
You're not. You can do that in Providence and say you're going to make mistakes, but learn from them.
But he can be on your power play just like David Pastrnak is.
Right. But if you can get him in Providence to get him those penalty kill minutes, I'd have to go back and double check, but I'm pretty sure he did see some penalty kill time this year while he was with Providence. I don't remember exactly how much.
He played all situations in Providence.
I know he played all situations. I just don't remember how much. Like, was he on the first penalty kill? Was he on the second? Like, what was the split? I don't remember those details, but I know he saw it, which he wasn't seeing that in Boston ever this year. And that's the 200-foot game we're talking about when that's what you can put Fabian Lysell down in Providence for last year.
Right.
Throw him on the penalty kill, not so much because you need him to develop that part of his game, but to see if he can even do it. Because But
I'm okay with not having Lysell or Pastrnak on my PK. Like, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with if you have your third line or your fourth line of Mark Kastelik, John Beecher, and then having Elias Lindholm, Pavel Zacha being your main penalty killing forward.
Even Morgan Geekie.
Those are your main penalty killing forwards. They really are.
I think some of it isn't just the penalty kill, though. Like, what happens if you put Fabian Lysell on the ice during a 3-on-3?
Well, that's your overtime situation.
I know, but you still need to see that.
But Pastrnak's on the ice all the time for your 3-on-3, and he's never on your PK. So,
right.
You know what I mean? Like, you can't. They never made it to overtime enough to see what Lysell could do in 3-on-3 situations.
No, they didn't. But that's part of, like, so you don't have any 3-on-3 samples of him in overtime in Boston, but you have it.
But you do. But having samples of that in Providence doesn't matter in Boston, because let's be realistic. The players he's playing against in Providence in 3-on-3 versus playing against a Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl in the NHL, a Sidney Crosby and a Evgeny Malkin, an Alexander Ovechkin. Like, when you look at the type of caliber players that are playing in your 3-on-3 in the NHL versus down in the AHL, there's no comparison.
No, you're not going to put him out 3-on-3 against Cale Makar, Nathan McKinnon, and Val Nichushkin. You're not doing that.
Why not, though? You're going to put Pastrnak out there.
Against those three? Probably not.
I disagree with you, because Pastrnak had more minutes than any other Bruins forward, because he would double shift in the 3-on-3 because they want to win the game, and it's only 5 minutes. It's not a 20-minute period. It's only 5 minutes. So why not? Because if he's out there, if Lysel's out there with like a McAvoy or a Lindholm, and you get that loose puck and you get Lysel going in one-on-one, why not?
You can end it.
Well, you can end it because you're doing it with Pasternak. You did it with, and I know that Marchand is a different animal, but you did it with Pasternak. You can do it with Geeky. You can do it with Patra. You can do it with Lysel. 3-on-3 is completely different because you want your goaltender to stand up in that one-on-one situation. You know what I mean? And so it doesn't matter. Yes, because Connor McDavid, if he has a turnover at the blue line and you can send Lysel in one-on-one, why not?
Send him.
You send him. You know what I mean? So I think the 3-on-3, because it's only 5 minutes, it's different because in the playoffs, it's full 20 minutes. It's not 3-on-3, it's 5-on-5. So then you still have your lines and you're going to shorten your bench. Now, that's one thing that the Bruins never did in 2011. They didn't do it in 2013. They didn't do it in 2019. They didn't do it in 2022, 23. All those years where they dominated, made it deep into the playoffs, or even in that historic season, they never had to shorten their bench. They were able to pull out all 4 lines.
It helps when your third line has Taylor Hall on it.
Okay, but go back to 2011. Your 4th line was the Merlot line. They weren't putting up. But what I'm saying is, the closest thing they have to a Merlot line is a Mark Kastelik-led 4th line, right?
Right, but you're comparing the 4th lines. Look at the 3rd lines. That 3rd line that year was very productive overall, and you could roll your top 9 out there, and then you rolled an identity line out there of your 4th line. Right now, you don't have a 3rd line that you can constantly.
But that's what I'm saying is they need. So when you have that depth, when you have like, even if Matthew Patra is on your 3rd line, why wouldn't you want that 3rd line to be productive?
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know what I mean? So that's what I'm saying. I
would be thrilled.
That's what I'm saying. The Bruins notoriously, because they build from the back end out, can usually roll those 4 lines because they have their top scoring line, their second scoring line, your 3rd line who's productive, who can also do penalty kill. They can play in all different situations. And then your 4th line is your shutdown line. You know what I mean? So the past couple of seasons, they've relied on that top line to be the shutdown line as well. They lost that identity. They're building the pieces that they got at the trade deadline, help them build back towards being that top to bottom consistent, because Husadinov can be on one of those shutdown lines. He doesn't have to put up the point production.
Right. He could be a 3rd line winger.
He could be your 3rd line or 4th line. You know what I mean? He could, Fraser Minton doesn't have to be your 2nd line to take over for Casey Middlestat. You don't know how Fraser Minton, Matthew Patra, and like, we haven't seen them play together.
And how many times did we look at the Bergeron line, Bergeron, Pasternak, and Marchand as the number 1 line? Like, when it was that line, sure, it was definitely the number 1 line. But
I hated the nickname for him, though.
Oh, I'm not even using it. But how often did we look at the David Krejci line and go, that's the 2nd line? It's like, well, Krejci is actually your number 1 center. Like, he's what you want in your 1 seat. Right. We had so much ideation and admiration for Patrice Bergeron that we just called it the 1st line.
Right.
And because that line was multi-purpose, because it was penalty kill between him and Brad Marchand, and it was the power play.
But they also got more production when they moved Pasternak down and moved Jake DeBrusk up. When they moved Pasternak down to play with Krejci, then you had 2 dominating lines versus 1 dominating line.
Right. You just didn't have the left wing. You didn't have the Milan Lucic on the left side to make what you had with Horton, Krejci, and Lucic.
Right.
And that's what you were trying to replicate. And, everybody wants to look at the entire body of work and point to singular moves that Don Sweeney has made and be all upset about the extension. But you have to look at how those moves were made as well, and go back to what the situation was. Like, how many years now have we sat there and gone, is Bergeron going to play next year? Like, and then all of a sudden you get 1 year off from David Krejci and you're like, oh, shit, we have to adjust because we thought, like, Who thought David Krejci was going to come back?
No one did.
Like, you can be like, oh, I figured it was this. I figured it. No one.
And look how long it took for Bergeron to make the decision to come back that final year.
Yeah. So, like, to sit there and say, well, they weren't prepared for life after Bergeron. Well, no. How could you be? You drafted a bunch of centers, and some of them, like, let's say Jacob Forsbacka-Karlsson hits the way that he was projected to back in 2016, 2017, whatever that year was where he was breaking into the NHL, right? He has a couple setbacks that keep him from taking over. Well, let me ask you this. If he hits all of those check marks along the way, right, are you then moving on from Patrice Bergeron because JFK's ready? No.
It's like Pittsburgh's not moving on from Sidney Crosby.
No matter who they have behind him, they're not moving on from him.
No.
They have some great prospects down in Wilkes-Barre, Scranton. So I don't think it's going to be as bad as people think. It's going to be a drop when you go from one of the best players of all time. You're going from a top 50 player of all time. I don't care where you put him on the list, but Bergeron's up there too. You are going to have a drop off.
Well, that's why
it's going to be significant.
That's why I keep saying, and the people have to realize, who are these players? Who are these prospects pushing out of the lineup over the last 5 years? Who are they pushing out of the lineup over the last 5 years?
Kendall says, I'm glad he was extended. You need the 3 years for Sweeney to build this team back up with a coach that will grow with this team. Absolutely. There's that. But also in 3 years from now, when this contract is over, you have answers on Spicer, Watch-Mellis, Pelosi, Hendrickson, Walsh, Dean Letourneau. He may not be in the NHL yet, but you have answers on where you think he can project to.
Oh, and let's not forget Frederick Brunet and Jackson Edward and even Matthew Poitras.
Loke Johansson. Loke Johansson will be in Providence next year. He is on your left side next year. I would love to see Loke Johansson and Ty Gallagher paired together next year in Providence. And that very easily could be your number one pairing in Providence. And guess what? They add that depth that we're talking about. So if someone goes down, you have that 20-minute weapon that you can plug in.
Right.
The question is are they ready for 20 minutes in the NHL? Maybe not yet. But you have someone that you can call up to develop for that. Right. You didn't have that before because you were going all in. One of the comments that we talked about a couple weeks ago or last, I don't even remember. It's you have the group. You have to look at your roster in 3 groups: current NHL, future NHL, middle everything else.
Right.
The middle everything else is what you plug in Providence when you have a hole, and it's what you plug in Boston when you have a hole, whether that hole comes from injury or trying a trade that didn't work, whatever. All right. When you look at Trevor Kuntar, right, I don't look at him as he is definitively my center 4 of the future, like after Castelli. Could he be that? He could. He's still young enough. But you know what? If I'm in a position
but I'm okay with them finding another Mark Kostelic in the NHL to plug in for Mark Kostelic in 5 years. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I'm okay with them plugging in another Cole Koepke. I'm okay with them. You know what I mean?
Like, are you looking for Mr. Right or are you looking for Mr. Right now?
Right. You know what I mean? Like when you're talking about the prospects, it's okay to have prospects that may end up staying in the AHL because you can find an NHL player that has all of the tools right now to fill in on your 3rd or 4th line.
Let's say your future 3rd line, or your future 2nd line, we'll call it. Your future 2nd line is Watch-Mellis, Minton, and Poitras. Right? However you want to line them up, right? Let's 100%. Say that's your future 2nd line.
100%.
Okay. Well, Minton could be on your 3rd line now because it makes you better. Poitras could be on your 3rd line now, and Watch-Mellis could be on your 2nd line now. Well, what happens when someone gets hurt? Well, let's say your third line center of Fraser Minton gets hurt. That's what you have John Farinacci for.
Or Patrick Brown.
Or Patrick Brown would move into the fourth line, and then you might move a guy like Costello.
But
that's what you're doing.
But everything happens but that's why you have the Patrick Brown in Providence, so that you could move him into a spot, especially if it's only a 2 or 3 game. You move him, he's gonna clear waivers going back down. You know what I mean? Like, those are the other things that come into play. Like, when you call up certain prospects and for an injury, and then those players get sent back down, but they're performing, you know what I mean? Then you risk losing them.
And the other thing about it too is, I just read Fenian's comment here, and it threw me off for a minute. I don't even know where I was going anymore. He says Sweeney should have been fired at the end of the season. If he blows the 7th overall with another reach, it will be this team that will set this team back further. Toggett's rumored reasons for not coming here speak volumes.
Rumors from who? Let me say, rumors from who? Jimmy Murphy? Back it
again. Well, here's the other thing. Okay, let's say Tocchet said, "Yeah, I'm not sure what the GM's situation looks like going forward." Okay, no head coach who's getting signed at that point does. And guess what? He's extended. So that's not. You really think that if it came down to that as his concern, Cam Neely wouldn't have stepped in and said, "No, we're just working out details for an extension. He'll be here for at least 2 more years."
I still want to know what picks set this team backwards.
The seventh rounder from 20, from I can't even say 2020, 2019, like those guys. Okay, sorry, the 7th rounder from 2018.
How many 7th rounders for any other franchise have affected the franchise?
Well, here's the other thing. Jake Schmaltz looks like he'll have an impact. Ty Gallagher looks like he can have an impact. Jackson Edwards looks like he'll be able to have an impact. And then you still have Casper Nason and Christian Konstantinsky. Both of them are still developing, but they're developing very, very well.
Do you think that John Beecher has set this franchise back?
I think you could have made better picks. I agree with that sentiment.
I'm asking, do you think John Beecher has set the franchise back?
No. Because also when you look at when they made the Beecher pick, right? You look at the other centers they had previously drafted. Lauko, Curtis Hall, Pavel Shen, Jack Studnicka, Cedric Pare, Trent Frederick, Oscar Steen. These guys were all drafted as centers. Forsbacka Carlson, Cameron Hughes, Jack Becker. Like, you had plenty of centers. You needed a center who could impact your team in short term. And John Beecher gave you that.
So I still want to know what draft pick set this team backwards.
Not as many as people think. It really comes down to that.
I will reiterate, unless you have a pick in the top 5 who is jumping to the NHL that next season, which the Bruins never have had for a long, long time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who were any of these players pushing out of the NHL lineup? Tell me. I want a fan who's making those comments to give me exact, specific.
Well, and that's the other thing. Okay, you want Don Sweeney fired. Okay, who you're replacing him with? Who are you bringing in 2 months before the draft to take over for Don Sweeney?
Which is what happened in 2015 when they fired Peter Chiarelli and Don Sweeney came in a month before the draft.
Why'd you give up my best point? I was going to circle back to that one. Because guess what? The new general manager is going to look at everything and go, I got to figure out what the hell I have. Mm-hmm. Don Sweeney knows what he has. Now, does that mean moving on from Don Sweeney will never be the right option? No. But guess what?
I'd rather have him in this position during this retool than a new GM.
Absolutely. Guess what? Go back and look at 2015 for that. And let's also not forget that since he took over in 2015, right? 2016, replaced some scouts. 2017, replaced some scouts. 2018, finished building his scouting staff the way he wanted it. 2018, okay. So 2018, that was the year where they're finally coming together. So 2019, and then you have COVID. The 2018, 19, and 20 draft classes all got affected by COVID. 2020, not as much because you still had footage on them, and that's when you were drafting them after their season had stopped. They still have managed to have a decent 2021, 22, 23 draft. So if you really want to throw 2 bad draft years in there, 2018 and 2019. And were they bad drafts, or was it just bad player development at bad timing? Because the world shut down.
And can we also point out, though, in 2018 and 2019, they had 1 first-round pick in both of those years.
Right.
One.
Oh, and 1 second-round pick, by the way. They didn't have a second-round pick in 2019, but they did in 2018.
Right.
Your picks were your best pick was John Beecher, 30th overall. Right. Between the 2 drafts, you picked 30th, 57th, 77th, 92nd, and then 119, 154, 181, 185, 192, and 212.
Right.
Good luck finding Austin Matthews in that pick.
Right.
Honestly, good luck finding a Henrik Lundqvist in there at this point. Good luck. You have, Henrik Lundqvist was a very late round pick. I'm trying to think. Brandon Hagel, I think it was a 6th round draft pick too, if I remember correctly. Was it Hagel? I think it was Hagel. Late round draft pick. Well, when you have more teams, because let's also not forget, what year was Vegas's first season in the league?
I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
You want to make my brain work?
2017, 2018. So the 2017 and 18 drafts, all of your picks got bumped down 1. They all got moved around. Right. Because you went from a 30-team draft to a 31-team draft. And you were still getting used to that. 2017-18 was the first season. So it would have been the 2018 draft and 2019 draft that were affected.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, in that you also lost a couple players to the expansion. You lost Colin Miller and you lost Jeremy Lauzon in expansion drafts. So, again, not that they're be-all, end-all, but this team is different if you have Jeremy Lauzon on it still. 2017, Vakanainen over Thomas, Robertson, and Norris. So, believe it or not, Sweeney actually wanted Robert Thomas. One of the scouts sat there and said we needed to take Vakanainen. And he was so adamant about it that Sweeney caved. Now, here's my counter to that. You then dealt Urho Vakanainen to get Hampus Lindholm. So if you don't take Vakanainen, you don't have Hampus Lindholm right now, which means your left defenseman is someone completely different. Because at the end of the day, they needed Thomas as much as they needed Vakanainen. They needed Robertson as much as they needed Vakanainen. And if you want to sit here and say one draft pick that set them back, well, the draft pick still also has to be here. So if you want to, honestly, there's one name that I think would be, and I don't even want to say it's okay, but would be the one that I could understand people throwing out there, and that's last year's Dean Letourneau. You should have been able to target someone who was not 5 years out. That being said, his ceiling is so much higher. It's a 6 1/2 dozen of the other argument. His ceiling is so high that you're okay with waiting longer for it, but you're in a position now where you would have liked to see someone who is more NHL ready. But that person looks like John Beecher. So which pick sets you back further? Last year's draft. A John Beecher pick or a Dean Letourneau pick? That's my question to you.
Well, my problem is that I'm looking at everyone behind Dean Letourneau.
Yeah.
Who, I just everyone that was picked after Dean Letourneau.
Again, I mean, if you want to throw a name out there just because we've seen him in college, is Cole Hudson as an example. But again, he's still not NHL ready. So,
right,
when you look at last year's draft class, yeah, really you saw Macklin Celebrini, Artem Levshinov, the kid in Calgary, and Luchenko in Philly. Those are the only guys who saw NHL action. So let's see next year who else comes out. Could Beckett Seneke maybe, Tijigin maybe, but like you weren't getting those guys at 25.
right.
But is again a Dean Letourneau project who's 5 years away, or John Beecher who's 2 years away.
And
who sets the franchise back?
And let's not forget, Letourneau was not supposed to be in college this year.
No, he wasn't.
That was a last minute decision for him to go to college.
Lysell Pick, who was a huge reach and is showing reasons he slipped to Boston, great skill, no compete. Well, let me ask you this. You said he's a huge reach, and then you said he slipped to Boston. How can a huge reach slip? A huge reach would mean they went up to get someone who should not have gone that high. But then you said the player slipped down to Boston. It can't be both. You can't have both, for one. And if you're saying it's luck, luck isn't really it, though. It's not luck. If you look at what they've gone through with true drafting and player development, you can really see, like, you know what? I can tell they don't watch juniors, they don't watch the American Hockey League, and they don't watch the NCAA. I can tell you don't. Because when you say drafting is luck, no, you have to pick the player. You think drafting Ty Gallagher was luck? No, you identified a player who had things in his game that made it so that he wasn't going to go in the first round. He dropped all the way to the 7th round because you were aware of all the other players around him saying, okay, as long as he's still there, we can get him later. We can get him later. We like this, and this about his game. We think we can develop this, and this. And then you watched him go to college. And it took him 4 years of college to mature and develop his game. Mature on and off the ice and mature in so many other ways of his game. And now you're looking at a guy who could potentially be a top 4 pairing defenseman, a top 4 defenseman in the NHL down the road. Like Andre Gasso. These guys are 7th round picks. And then you look at Fabien Lysell. He didn't mature at the rate we thought
22.
He would. But that's my point. He's
only 22.
We would have liked to have seen him mature quicker, but he's only 22. It's not exactly like he's 15. He's been in the league for 15 years. His skill level was high. He was ranked all over the boards due to compete level. I do watch juniors. Certainly doesn't sound like it. And again, I also mentioned the American Hockey League and the NCAA in there as well. So, fine. And yes, his skill level was high. That's why they took him with the 21st overall pick. He was ranked all over the boards because scouts don't always agree on stuff. And scouts and general managers don't always agree on the most important stuff.
And can we reiterate the fact that when he was drafted in 2021, you still had Brad Marchand, Patrice Bergeron, David Pastrnak. At that point, David Krejci had not walked away. You still had Jake DeBrusk. You had all these players. So putting him in Providence was the right thing to do to help him build his game. He showed the last 12 games of the season that he may have finally gotten over that unwillingness to play that all-around game and truly compete for a spot next season.
Right. And in his first year with Providence, 54 games, he produced 37 points. All right, which fine, not a bad season. That's his first season from the Vancouver Giants, where he had 62 points in 53 games. So his production dropped almost, roughly close to half.
Right.
And then
you have
then
to
the following
remember,
season,
you have to remember, he didn't come from the OHL. He didn't come from juniors in the OHL. He came from Sweden, which is a
right?
different type of hockey than a Connor Bedard or a Matt Patra. He came
Yep.
from Sweden. It's a completely different game.
He has to adjust to the ice differential. He has to adjust to the physicality of the game. And guess what? His second season in Providence, you saw 50 points in 56 games.
Right.
This past year, back down to 34, but there was other aspects of his game. Once you saw the offense was there, you said, work on these other things.
Right.
So I would make the case he's not setting you back. He's actually on time.
Correct.
He's where you wanted him to be. And he got the 12 games, 3 points in that time frame this past season with Boston to show enough that, hey, you know what? Offense might suffer a little bit in my first year, but that's the stuff that I already know.
Right.
So in focusing on everything else on my game, getting it all to translate, that's fine. And this is someone who, yes, it was the under 20s, but competed internationally as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking at all of that stuff. And that's why someone like Lach Mellis, I mean, this dude has played how many games internationally at this point? 80 something? Where is he? That's all Sweden. Although I will say,
and let's also put into mind too that Lach Mellis, they drafted him out of the Swedish league, and he then went to the NCAA. Lysell went straight to Providence. He didn't go to the NCAA. Again, development is different when you go through the NCAA than just going straight to the AHL.
Yeah, I forgot to pull this comment up. Why is everyone obsessed over drafting? Doesn't Boston have the most points and wins in all of hockey in the last 10 years? That tell the tale of being good or not as a GM. Well, there's also that factor too.
Well, because it doesn't matter, because if they don't, like, even Don Sweeney will tell you that he failed as a GM because they didn't win 2 more Stanley Cups or 3 more Stanley Cups with the core group that they had of Krejci and Bergeron and Marchand. He'll say that because the ultimate way that they look at success is winning Stanley Cups. But yes, he's not a bad GM. I would take him over Kyle Dubas. I would take him over what has Shanahan done? You know what I mean?
Shanahan's the president.
But he was
he's running everything.
He was a GM in Detroit, though.
No, was he the GM in Detroit?
I thought he was the GM in Detroit.
No, that's Steve Yzerman. And which I would rather Don Sweeney over Steve Yzerman. You know what? I'd also rather Don Sweeney over. I mean, yeah, Julien Brisebois having success, but what's going to happen if they lost? They didn't win the cup this year. What are they going to do going into next year? Let's see. I certainly hope Lysell is ready for a top 9 spot next year. If he is working on his game off the puck, his speed would greatly help. Thank you for the chat and show. Yeah, we're going to be doing more. Obviously, the off season slowing us down a little bit, but and actually, I just noticed the time too. I'm going to get going shortly here because my daughter has a softball game, and we could go on all night, but you also have a shift for work to prepare for. But in general, though, I don't think the extension is bad. I think people are overreacting to it, as they tend to do. And by the time this contract is over, if people can stop
let's put it this way. If they take another nosedive, he's not making it through his contract.
No, and that's why a 2-year extension is the perfect term, because you give him this year to do the rebuild, one more year to kind of see it through, and if it doesn't work after that year, there's only 1 year left, and you can move on from him. You have the money to pay him to go away at that point.
Right.
So it's the perfect length. You've given him a 3-year window, because it also means if it's going well, you don't have to renegotiate a new contract. And oh, by the way, sit there and say, hey, we don't have as much negotiating power because you won a cup already.
Right.
Like and that's the other thing too, is he has kept this team competitive for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me concede and say the 2015 draft was a failure. Okay, fine. I don't think it was, but I will concede that point and say, okay, even with that debacle, air quotes, because that's what someone else might describe it as, this team still didn't miss the playoffs for 10 years.
Right.
So if he is so bad at drafting, how has this team remained competitive for over a decade?
But because, in all honesty, even if he is bad at drafting, which I disagree with, I get where you're going, 100%, Chris. I get where you're going. But what we have to remember too is a lot of those draft picks were moved.
The high-end draft picks were moved. The low-end draft picks were not. So
no, some of the low-end draft picks are still developing. Some of them have.
Right. So how can we say that the low-end draft picks are bad because we haven't seen what they become yet?
Right. Right. And again, let's keep in mind, how many draft picks have they had since he's taken over as GM that were in the first 3 rounds? I mean, seriously.
First 3 rounds, I mean,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 16 draft tip. Only 16 in the first 3 rounds. 16
over a decade. Over a decade. That's barely. That's what, 1.16 per year.
And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm not counting 2015 because we all know 2015. Only 6 in the first round.
Yeah,
Charlie McAvoy.
Over a decade. Over a decade.
Charlie McAvoy, Trent Frederick, Trent Frederick was not a failure. We know Charlie McAvoy.
Look what he's doing in Edmonton right now.
Right. Okay. Vakanainen, which again got moved for Hampus Lindholm. John Beecher, who's not a failure. Fabian Lysell, he's not a failure yet. And Dean Letourneau. Those are their first round draft picks. Are you calling Charlie McAvoy a failure?
Well, Dean Letourneau's a failure because he only put up 3 points in so many games at BC this year. Didn't you hear?
Oh, I know.
He sucks.
Again, he went from high school, not juniors, high school.
Prep high school, by the way.
Prep high school to college to a BC program who's top of the nation, but he's a failure.
Yeah, and not many second-round picks either. Exactly. Right. And well, those they're hitting on.
Those are my points. Like, so your last second-round draft pick was Matthew Poitras. Are you calling him a failure? Because he was the last second-round pick the Bruins had, and that was 2 seasons ago. That was 2022.
And Lohrei
and then before that was Lohrei in 2020. Are they failures?
I don't get it.
I mean, we can't. So you want to talk about the draft history?
Real quick, if he had just had this year, he would be trying to build it back too fast with just unrestricted free agents, which is a big problem.
I disagree with you. Yeah. I disagree with you.
Every team tries to address needs through unrestricted free agency. All 32
teams. It's an immediate impact. That's an immediate impact. You don't have to wait for the development. The other option is you are a Chicago, you are a San Jose, and that's how you get those number 1 draft picks. And the last time that happened was Taylor Hall. And they didn't even get Taylor Hall. They got Tyler Seguin.
And I know people want to rip on Chiarelli for the Seguin deal, but you don't get the same Tyler Seguin that Dallas has if he stays in Boston.
No.
The trade shook him up.
He was so immature that he showed up to so many team meetings and not even team meetings, but practices hungover in the playoffs. That is a proven. Those aren't rumors.
Right. Yes, some unrestricted free agents. they're not going like they're getting unrestricted free agents every year because not every single one of them is going to pan out. But let me ask you this, Kendall. Elias Lindholm, I think, is someone that you're probably heavily inferring to here. If he plays next season the way he's playing in juniors right now and the way he ended the season.
Worlds,
what did I say? Juniors. You know what I meant. Worlds.
Or even down the stretch.
Or like I said, or how he ended the season. If he plays all of next year in that manner, are we now changing the narrative on the Elias Lindholm signing? Because it was unsuccessful when he was hurt. Guess what? Any player who gets hurt is an unsuccessful draft pick or signing.
We had that conversation about Jacob Zaboral. Had he not got hurt, he was playing in the NHL when he got hurt.
Yep.
He was producing, he was doing what his job was at the NHL. Had he not gotten hurt, you don't know what type of defenseman he could be. Your top pairing with Charlie McAvoy right now.
You might have dealt Urho Vakanainen for a top line winger.
Right, instead of Hampus Lindholm. You don't know had Jacob Zaboral, because everyone was high on Jacob Zaboral. And since his injury, he's only
gone downhill since then. But it was a knee injury, if I remember correctly, which is kind of an important body part when you're trying to skate.
Especially for a defenseman.
Yeah. So, and I would also say the biggest reach I think Don Sweeney has had in the draft. The biggest reach was probably Zach Senyshyn at 15. But they also knew that he wasn't going to last until 37. Right. But you know what? You should be thankful that they reached for Senyshyn, because that's why they drafted Brandon Carlo. Because they filled left wing and right wing with DeBrusk and Senyshyn. If you don't go Senyshyn there, you don't go Carlo in round 2.
Right.
And oh, by the way, if you look at JFK as someone who might not drop, you reach on him, you don't end up with Carlo.
Right.
And they knew, I think it was Anaheim wanted to draft Senyshyn. And so they knew he wasn't going to be there. And you had already made 2 picks that were solid. Zaboral was what? I think he was a top 6 defenseman on the board.
Right, and he was drafted 13th. But he was definitely in the top 10 for defensemen. Yes.
Yeah, because the only defensemen who were rated higher than him went higher than him, and they were Hanifin, Provorov, Werenski, and then Zaboral was 4th on that list.
Right.
And okay, so Shabbat was on there, but like
again,
so now it's a toss-up?
Again, we're not having this conversation had Zaboral not gotten hurt.
Oh, absolutely.
100%. He would be still either with the Bruins or have moved on because of one reason or another, but he would have been successful in the NHL because he was moving that way while he was playing in Boston until he got injured.
Absolutely. Let's see. Actually, I was not referring to them. I think they will be fine. Okay. I meant not overpaying for average players if he was trying to get good too fast. Okay, so basically like pulling Peter Chiarelli's and signing and keeping a guy like Chris Kelly for too long and, giving him no movement clauses and that sort of stuff. I get where you're going with it.
Matt,
and we appreciate the kind words. Matt. But the thing is that's why I also don't see them going after Mitch Marner, because he's swung for the big free agents before and missed. I think Elias Lindholm was a lot more calculated, as was Nikita Zadorov.
But Mitch Marner could be calculated as well if you're looking to push that secondary scoring with that playmaker. You know what I mean? So it could be more calculated. The problem that I have with Mitch Marner is overpaying because of the other offers. You know what I mean? And not having enough to fill the other holes that you have. Because if you can get him for an Elias Lindholm deal, I would take Mitch Marner in a heartbeat. But you're not going to get him for that type of deal. He's going to push that 13, 14, 15 million.
If you can get him on the Pastrnak contract, I would do it. If you can get him at the same dollar amount, not
As
percent of cap,
Pasta?
but the same dollar amount as what Pasta is, I would still do it.
Well, yeah, because everyone after Pasta is higher than Pasta now. You look at Nylander. Pasta set that mark, and now everyone after him is higher than him.
He
You
just
know what I
didn't
mean?
say it on a podcast, so people don't hate him for it.
Well, no, but Pasta didn't hold out to set that mark.
No, but I'm just saying he also didn't say anything about it on a podcast, so people don't hate
Right.
him for
Well,
it.
because also Pasta, he signed his extension in the middle of the season.
I know.
You know what I mean? That's the other thing. So then every free agent after Pasternak that has that elite scoring, like William Nylander got more than Pasternak because he signed after Pasternak.
Oh yeah, no, he totally reset that market. And now that
Yeah.
we've got the cap going up, it's going to be
Right.
This is going to be a crazy offseason, and I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to
But
it.
I would take Mitch Marner for 8 to 12 million. I wouldn't go above 12 million. 11 and a half may even be my cap. But I can't see
Pasternak's at the 11.25. So I mean, I guess I would go the extra
11 and a half. I would be okay, but I wouldn't go 8 years for a Mitch Marner either. Because again,
you'd only be able to go the 7, but yeah, I get where you're going with it, and the 8-year. That's why I look at someone like a Besser. I look at honestly like I want to look at some of the restricted free agents. We'll have that conversation the next time we sit down because there's some restricted free agents that I think you can get on really good deals and put their team in a pinch. You might not get all of them. Some of them might get matched. But like, I know people have mentioned Will Cooley.
That offer sheets is still taboo. Look what it did to St. Louis. Well, St. Louis got 2 great players from Edmonton that helped push them back to the playoffs, and then they ended up with a better coach than what they had too. So
right. And what you also need to worry about is like people are worried about the revenge offer sheet. The biggest restricted free agent that you have coming up at the end of next season is Matthew Poitras.
Bobby Brewski has a great question.
Let me get this one pulled up here. I just got to find my cursor. There we go. One factor I wonder about, does Mitch Marner's play style gel with that of the Bruins? It's the same question I have with Ehlers as well. Would it love either or?
I think Marner's playing style complements. It may not gel, but it complements, because look at the growth of David Pastrnak over what he brought when he first came into what the player he is now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Marner would complement that and build into it, because I think the culture in Boston, and that's why I posed that question on Twitter. What does Brandon Carlo think of the culture in Toronto versus the culture in Boston? Because that core 4, had they had the culture that Boston has, may have pushed past some of these other teams.
And what's funny about it is you mentioned Brandon Carlo. The one that tells me all I need to know was Ryan O'Reilly. When Ryan O'Reilly said, F this, I'm going to Nashville, that should have spoke volumes for – I mean, I think a lot of the fans already knew it, but that should have spoke volumes to the front office there, and the problem is it didn't.
And the other thing is, too, is that, people will call out Mitch Marner for his fiery take on the ice, telling his teammates to wake up in Game 7, and then they're complaining about him not producing. Look at Austin Matthews, 1 goal in the second round in his entire career.
Right. Like, again, Mitch Marner might not be the solution, but he's not the biggest problem that they have either.
No. I see out of that core four, if it's not William Nylander, it's Mitch Marner. Those are their 2 best players, all-around players. Austin Matthews can score. Tell me what else he gives that team.
Well, did you see his 2-way play? And I don't know. I'm just trying to go with it.
William Nylander and Mitch Marner are the 2 players that if I was Toronto, which we already discussed that you're not trading away your captain, but those are the 2 players that you build around.
Yeah. And we've had the conversation before. We also don't know who's going to be out there. I wonder if a rant. They're treating Ryan O'Reilly like he has a no move clause down in Nashville. Could he become available though if it's done in the off season?
Well, that's Kendall's comment. Matthew calls out players as passengers. Exactly. That he called them as passengers after the fact. And he also didn't take ownership for himself because he was a passenger.
Mm-hmm. There were, I think, 2 or 3 players, a small handful of players who came out and said, "I need to be better." Everything else was we this, we that. And I get it. Hockey's a team game. But when you lose in the fashion that Toronto did, there's been no self-reflection. Marner will walk and possibly Tavares. Yeah.
Tavares has already said that he wants to end his career.
He wants to stay. Would you rather Marner for 7 years or Tavares for 4?
Marner. I don't like Tavares at all.
Just asking. But no, there's I definitely want to do more dive into some of the restricted free agents. So, like I said, there's Will Cooley. They're out of New York. There's Matthew Knies' name keeps coming up that people want to. That's not happening either.
I would love for them to give Matthew Knies an offer sheet, but if I'm Toronto, I'm matching it no matter what.
That's the thing is Toronto's already going to hate you anyway, so there's no point in not putting forth an offer sheet. Right. But you have to do it to a point where you're not offering too much and negotiating a long-term contract for them, because they can match it. They can also do better. So if you do, because you also don't want to go past the 5 years, because then you're dividing out a longer contract, higher AAV, and giving up more compensation. So a 5-year contract at $12 million, you're still offering multiple first-round picks.
Right.
I'm not doing that. And if we're doing nice,
let's keep in mind though, you have to keep in mind that if the Bruins are competitive again, they're not going to have very many first-round picks to begin with.
Right. And these are 2026
higher end first-round picks,
and that's part of the
problem. That's part of the problem that the Bruins have always had, is that when they get a first-round pick, they package it with something to get the help me now, which most of those trades do pan out. Most of those packages do pan out, but then you got to put the ownership on the players for not getting it done.
Right, exactly. So, but keeping in mind the time, Knies will resign, especially if Marner leaving. Absolutely. That's the thing, is you have a shot at one or the other, not both. And I think your odds of getting Marner are higher than your odds of getting Matthew Knies.
But you also have to keep in mind, it's not just Boston.
Exactly. There are 31
other teams that can make those offers for Marner, for Knies, for anyone. There are 31 other teams out there, or 30 other teams if you take Toronto out of the mix. You know what I mean? There are 30 other teams that are going to be vying for all of these players.
Exactly. So, but I will definitely dive more into some of the restricted free agents. We'll be getting closer to the draft. I know I want to have some conversations with some folks about the draft, so maybe we can do something around that at some point. But I do want to head out so I can catch my daughter's softball game, and I know you have to prepare for work.
Yep.
And we said we weren't going to go for 3 hours, so let's try to hit that mark. Do you have any final thoughts to wrap this up?
Just that I like the passion and the comments and questions from especially Kendall, and I appreciate Bobby and Fenian, William Anderson, like everyone that participated today, because it was a great debate, and that's what I love. I love debating. Not everyone's going to agree with everything, and I like the debate, and I like when you hear an answer. If you don't like it, you want to push back, because that's what makes it better. So thank you for participating today and taking time out during your day to watch.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you to everybody for watching. And same thing, the pushback is great. And I'm glad we saw no name calling, none of that stuff. The respect level is there, which we greatly appreciate. And I will say, I think people are going to be a little hard on this new goalie at first, just because he's been playing over in Czechia. I've heard some good things about him. I've talked to a couple goaltender experts that I have been in touch with. And the question is just going to be, can his game translate to NHL shot quality? If it can, people are going to be really happy with this kid, and he's probably going to skyrocket up the depth chart in goal. You could legitimately be looking at a number 2 when Korpisalo's contract is over here. So, again, the potential is there, but this is someone who's coming over from a league that's nowhere close to what the NHL is, nowhere close to what the AHL is. So they're putting him in Providence. They're going to see what he can do. And quite frankly, they needed a player like this because DiPietro or Bussy, one of them isn't coming back. If not both of them, like he could be your Providence starter next year. He's that good. It
also depends too, like how many of those other 31 teams need a backup that's NHL ready. You know what I mean? That could poach one of the Bruins' depth goaltending.
That also don't have an 8-year signed goaltender as their starter, and they don't have 3 years to wait for a number 2 spot.
Right.
It's also the competition, the ability to say, yeah, I want to at least earn the job. In Boston, I don't have a shot to earn the job.
Right.
So I do think you'll probably see DiPietro and Zasicek, or I'm going to butcher it until I learn it, but I think they'll be the tandem. But if you lose Bussy and DiPietro, he is someone that you can put in there with someone else and still be okay in Providence.
Right.
He's not NHL ready, but he never was supposed to be.
Right. Well, and unless they plan on moving on from Swayman or Korpisalo, he's not filling that spot anyways.
No, but if you need, if Swayman got hurt for a game or if Korpisalo got hurt for a game, like you're okay with calling him up to be a backup. He has professional experience. He has that kind of talent. It's just, can the talent translate over to the NHL, to the smaller ice? And that goalie Bob, I guarantee you had a hand in this. So
goalie Bob.
All I'm saying is don't jump over this kid's throat if it's off to a slow start.
Well, but that's not how Boston fan base works.
I know, and I'm looking forward to it.
All right, get out of here before you miss your daughter's.
Alrighty. My last thought, though, as always, go Bees.